A blind puppy was about to be put down at an overcrowded animal shelter, just another tragic day for a veterinarian who'd seen too many. But when she cleaned the mud from his collar, everything changed. Hidden beneath the grime was something that would turn her world upside down. This wasn't just any lost dog. The collar held secrets that powerful people would kill to keep buried. When armed men storm the shelter in the dead of night, she realizes that some truths come with a terrifying price. Now she's running for her life with only a blind dog to guide her through the darkness. What was hidden in that collar that made it worth murder? And can they both survive long enough to expose the truth? Your comments and presence here remind me why I tell these stories. If you still believe in the healing strength of love, truth, and quiet courage, then you're the reason this channel exists. Dr. Nanita Thornton stood in the fluorescent-lit examination room of County Animal Services, her heart heavy, as she looked down at the trembling German Shepherd puppy pressed against her boots. The tiny creature's fur was so caked with mud that its original color was barely visible. Its clouded eyes stared sightlessly ahead, but there was an unmistakable intelligence in the way it tracked her movements through sound and smell. "It's okay, little one," she whispered, kneeling down beside the frightened animal. The puppy responded by pressing even more firmly against her worn work boots, its whole body shaking. Nanita felt the familiar ache in her chest, the one that came with knowing what usually happened to special needs animals in an overcrowded shelter. The animal control officers who had brought him in stood by the door, their expressions sympathetic but resigned. "Found him wandering near mile marker 47, Officer Martinez explained. "Almost got hit by a truck. Poor thing couldn't see where he was going." Nanita gently ran her hands over the puppy's body, conducting her initial assessment. The dog flinched at first but didn't pull away. Instead, it leaned into her touch, as if starved for gentle contact. Her trained fingers detected ribs too prominent under matted fur, and the clouded state of both eyes confirmed what was obvious: complete blindness. "The kennels are already at maximum capacity," Officer Chen reminded her quietly. "And with his condition." Nanita knew what he meant. Their small county shelter operated on a shoestring budget, and special needs animals were the hardest to place. The euthanasia paperwork sat ready on her desk, a cruel reality of her job that never got easier, even after 15 years. But something about this puppy was different. Maybe it was the way he clung to her boots, refusing to let go even when she tried to step back. Or perhaps it was how, despite his obvious neglect and fear, he still sought human connection. The puppy's behavior touched something deep inside her, a chord of compassion she couldn't ignore. 24 hours, she heard herself say. "Let's give him 24 hours before we make any decisions." The officers exchanged glances but nodded. They knew Dr. Thornton well enough to recognize when her mind was made up. After they left, Nanita carefully lifted the puppy, who whimpered softly but didn't struggle. She carried him to the temporary holding area, a quiet space away from the main kennels where she could examine him more thoroughly. "Let's get you cleaned up, shall we?" she murmured, gathering supplies. The puppy sat perfectly still as she filled a sink with warm water, as if understanding her intentions. With gentle hands, she began washing away layers of dried mud and grime. The puppy gradually relaxed under her touch, letting out small sighs of contentment as the warm water soothed his skin. As Nanita worked methodically through the matted fur, her fingers brushed against something solid beneath the dirt. Curious, she parted the fur more carefully, revealing what appeared to be a collar. Not the standard nylon variety sold in pet stores, but something more elaborate. "What have we here?" she wondered aloud, carefully cleaning around the area. As more mud washed away, an ornate collar emerged. It was unlike anything she'd seen in her years of veterinary work, intricately designed with unusual markings that seemed almost military in nature. The discovery made her pause. This wasn't a typical stray. The collar suggested ownership, care, and perhaps a story far more complex than a simple case of abandonment. The puppy turned his head toward her, his blind eyes somehow managing to convey trust and dependence. Nanita felt her throat tighten with emotion. "Don't worry," she said softly, scratching behind his ears. "We're going to figure this out." The puppy responded by licking her hand, his tail wagging slightly for the first time since his arrival. Nanita glanced at the clock on the wall, knowing she had just committed herself to much more than a 24-hour reprieve. There was a mystery here, one that started with an ornate collar and a blind puppy who refused to let go of her boots. Despite the voice in her head reminding her of the shelter's limitations and the practical impossibility of saving every animal that came through their doors, she knew this case was different. The puppy had chosen her, clinging to her boots with a desperation that spoke of more than simple fear. Now, with the discovery of the unusual collar, her professional curiosity was piqued as well. She had 24 hours to uncover the truth. 24 hours to potentially save a life that had literally clung to her for salvation. Nanita's hands trembled as she worked at cleaning the ornate collar. The warm water slowly dissolved layers of caked-on mud, revealing intricate metalwork underneath. As she carefully scrubbed away the last bits of grime, her breath caught in her throat. There, gleaming under the harsh fluorescent lights, was an official military service tag. The puppy sat quietly on the examination table, his blind eyes focused in her general direction as if sensing her growing tension. Nanita's fingers traced the engraved letters, her heart pounding as she read the identification. Service Dog, Sergeant First Class Daniel Hayes, United States Army, Special Operations. "Daniel Hayes," she whispered, the name hitting her like a physical blow. She had seen it in the local newspaper just 2 weeks ago, in the obituaries section. A hometown hero killed in action overseas. The article had included a photo of a young soldier with a determined expression and auburn hair, just like hers. The puppy whined softly, pressing his wet nose against her hand. Nanita blinked back tears as she examined the collar more closely. The craftsmanship was extraordinary, definitely not standard military issue. As her fingers explored the intricate metalwork, she felt a slight catch, an almost imperceptible seam in the design. "What's this?" she murmured, her veterinary training making her fingers nimble as they investigated the anomaly. There was a subtle click, and a small compartment popped open, revealing a tiny microchip nestled in a waterproof casing. Nanita's hands shook as she carefully extracted the chip. It was sophisticated technology, far more advanced than the standard identification microchips she implanted in shelter animals. Connected to it was a small piece of paper, folded multiple times to fit in the tiny space. She carefully unfolded it, revealing a set of coordinates and a handwritten message. "Trust no one at Blackwater Industries. The truth is in Sector 7. The puppy pressed closer, as if offering comfort while Nanita tried to process what she was seeing. This wasn't just a lost pet case anymore. The level of sophistication in the collar's hidden compartment, the encrypted chip, the cryptic warning, it all pointed to something much bigger and potentially dangerous. She walked to her office computer, the puppy following the sound of her footsteps. Her fingers flew across the keyboard as she searched for information about Daniel Hayes. The local newspaper article appeared first, a basic obituary describing a decorated soldier who died serving his country. But as she dug deeper, she found more recent articles questioning the circumstances of his death. One headline caught her eye. "Family demands investigation into soldier's death near Blackwater Industries facility." The article mentioned that Hayes had been stationed near a Blackwater research center in the weeks before his death. The official report cited a training accident, but his family was pushing for a deeper investigation. Nanita leaned back in her chair, her mind racing. Why would a soldier equip his service dog with such elaborate concealment technology? What had Daniel Hayes discovered that required this level of secrecy? The puppy rested his head on her knee, and she absently stroked his ears, noting how his coat was finally starting to show its true golden brown color after the bath. "What happened to your owner, little one?" she whispered. "What did he find?" The puppy's only response was to press closer, his presence both a comfort and a reminder of the weight of her discovery. Nanita looked at the coordinates again, then back at the computer screen showing Hayes' photo. The young soldier's eyes seemed to stare back at her, holding secrets she was now inadvertently part of. She pulled up a map and entered the coordinates. They pointed to a remote location about 50 miles outside of town, near where an unmarked Blackwater Industries facility was rumored to be located. The same area where Daniel Hayes had reportedly died. Nanita's clinical detachment began to crack as the implications sank in. This wasn't just about saving one blind puppy anymore. She had stumbled onto something much bigger, something that had cost a soldier his life. The hidden compartment, the encrypted chip, the warning message. It all spoke of desperation and danger. The puppy whined again, somehow sensing her distress. Nanita looked down at him, seeing him in a new light. He wasn't just a stray who had clung to her boots earlier that day. He was a crucial piece of evidence, a carrier of secrets, and possibly the last link to whatever truth Daniel Hayes had died trying to expose. Her office suddenly felt too small, too exposed. The weight of her discovery pressed down on her shoulders as she realized she couldn't simply ignore what she'd found. But she also couldn't be sure whom to trust with this information. Daniel Hayes' warning echoed in her mind. Trust no one at Blackwater Industries. Nanita stared at the computer screen, her world tilting on its axis. The military photo of Daniel Hayes filled her monitor. Those familiar auburn hair and determined green eyes she'd know anywhere. The same eyes that had glared at her with hurt and anger 8 years ago, the last time they'd spoken. "Oh, God," she whispered, her hand covering her mouth. "Daniel." The blind puppy pressed against her legs, whimpering softly as if sensing her distress. Nanita's mind reeled back to that final argument in their parents' living room, the words still sharp and cutting after all these years. "The military isn't some noble calling, Daniel," she had shouted, her voice thick with frustration. "It's just a way for defense contractors to get rich while soldiers die." Daniel had stood ramrod straight, just like their father always did. "You don't understand anything about service or sacrifice, Becca. You never have." "I understand that Dad missed half our childhoods because of deployments," she'd fired back. "And now you're going to do the same thing? Follow in his footsteps like some blind sheep?" The hurt in Daniel's eyes had been immediate and deep. "At least I'm not running away from our family's legacy. Someone has to carry it forward, since you're too busy saving stray cats to care about anything important." Those had been their last words to each other. Nanita had stormed out, and in the years that followed, pride and stubbornness had kept them apart. Even when their mother called 2 weeks ago about Daniel's death, Nanita had remained distant, telling herself it was just another military training accident. Sad but expected in their line of work. But now, her trembling fingers clicked through news articles about Daniel's death. The official report cited a training accident near a Blackwater Industries facility, but the details were suspiciously vague. Daniel's unit had been conducting joint exercises with Blackwater security forces when the incident occurred. No witnesses, no detailed explanation. "Training accident?" Nanita muttered, looking down at the sophisticated hidden compartment in the puppy's collar. "Since when does a routine training exercise require encrypted messages and hidden compartments?" She opened a new tab and searched for Blackwater Industries. The company's website was sleek and professional, touting their role as a leading defense contractor specializing in military training and advanced weapons development. Their facilities were scattered across the country, including the one where Daniel had died. The puppy's wet nose nudged her hand, and Nanita felt tears sliding down her cheeks. "I'm so sorry, Daniel," she whispered, remembering his face that last day, young and proud in his newly pressed uniform. "I should have been there, should have tried to understand." She pulled up a satellite view of the coordinates from Daniel's message. The area appeared empty on the map, just wilderness and a few dirt roads, but she knew from local rumors that Blackwater maintained an unmarked facility somewhere in that region, the same facility near where her brother had died. The guilt hit her in waves. While she'd been holding on to her anger about their father's military career, Daniel had been uncovering something dangerous enough to get him killed. He'd trusted his service dog to carry the evidence, probably hoping the puppy would somehow find its way to someone who could expose the truth. Instead, it had found its way to her, the sister who had abandoned him. Nanita wiped her eyes and looked at the message again. Trust no one at Blackwater Industries. The truth is in Sector 7. The word seemed to pulse with urgency, carrying Daniel's last warning from beyond the grave. She thought about their father, now retired but still deeply connected to the military community. Should she tell him about the message? About her suspicions? But Daniel's warning had been clear. Trust no one. Even family connections could be compromised. The puppy settled at her feet with a soft sigh, and Nanita felt a fierce protectiveness surge through her. This small, blind creature was Daniel's last messenger, carrying whatever evidence he had died trying to expose. Her brother had given his life to uncover something at Blackwater Industries, and now that truth had literally walked into her shelter and clung to her boots. "I let you down before," she whispered, both to the puppy and to Daniel's memory. "I won't do it again." She began methodically copying down everything she'd found about Blackwater Industries, her veterinary training helping her organize the information with clinical precision. The company's military contracts, their facility locations, their connections to Daniel's unit, everything could be important. The weight of her discovery pressed down on her shoulders. Her brother hadn't died in some routine training accident. He'd discovered something sinister enough to require elaborate precautions and hidden messages, something worth killing for. And now she was the only one who knew. Nanita's hands shook as she dialed the number she'd found in Daniel's military records. After 3 rings, a crisp female voice answered. "Lieutenant Colonel Warner speaking." Nanita took a deep breath. "Colonel Warner, this is Dr. Nanita Thornton from Cedar County Animal Services. I'm calling about a service dog that was recently brought to our shelter, one that belonged to Sergeant First Class Daniel Hayes." There was a long pause on the line. "Dr. Thornton." Hayes never mentioned having a sister who was a veterinarian. Nanita's heart skipped a beat. Of course, Daniel's commanding officer would know about his family. "We weren't in contact these past 8 years, she admitted, her voice tight. "But his service dog is here at my shelter, a blind German Shepherd puppy." "Ranger," Warner said immediately, her tone softening. "We thought he was lost in the incident. How did he end up at your shelter?" "Animal control found him near the interstate." Nanita watched as Ranger lifted his head at the sound of his name. "He was in rough shape, but he's recovering well. I wanted to arrange for his return to the proper military authorities." "That dog meant everything to Daniel," Warner said. "He was training Ranger for chemical weapons detection. The blindness was actually an advantage, heightened his other senses. Daniel insisted on working with him, even though others thought a blind dog couldn't serve." She paused. "Dr. Thornton, your brother was an exceptional soldier." Nanita swallowed hard. "Colonel Warner, may I ask about the accident? The reports are so vague, and given that I'm his next of kin..." "You're right. The reports are vague." Warner's voice took on a careful tone. "Your brother had been investigating certain irregularities in the weeks before his death. Equipment failures that didn't add up. Questioning contractor relationships that seemed unusual." Nanita's pulse quickened. "What kind of irregularities?" "He was very methodical about it, gathering evidence, documenting everything." Warner sighed. "But he became increasingly paranoid in those final weeks. Started keeping things to himself, which wasn't like him at all. The day before the incident, he told me he was close to proving something big, but needed more time to verify his findings." Nanita gripped the phone tighter. And the next day he was dead. A training accident, according to the official report. Warner's words were measured, deliberate. Though several details never sat right with me, the timing, the lack of witnesses, the way certain evidence disappeared from his quarters before the investigation began. Ranger pressed against Nanita's legs, and she reached down to scratch behind his ears. Colonel Warner, what if Daniel found a way to preserve some of that evidence? The silence that followed was heavy with understanding. When Warner spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. Dr. Thornton, I think we should continue this conversation in person. Somewhere private. Do you know the Silver Creek Diner off Highway 35? Yes, I do. Meet me there tomorrow at 0700. 7 o'clock in the morning. And Dr. Thornton ... Warner paused. Be careful who you talk to about this. Your brother made some powerful people very nervous. I understand. Nanita glanced down at Ranger. Should I bring the dog? Absolutely. If Daniel trained him for chemical detection, Ranger might be more valuable than either of us realizes. Warner's tone grew firm. One more thing, Doctor. Thornton, I need you to know that I looked out for your brother. He was one of my best, and I didn't believe the accident report for a second. But proving anything against Blackwater Industries... She stopped abruptly. Nanita's breath caught. She hadn't mentioned Blackwater. Colonel Warner, I think I have something you need to see. Something Daniel made sure would be found. Tomorrow then, Warner replied. And watch your back, Doctor. Thornton, if you have what I think you have, there are people who would go to great lengths to keep it hidden. After hanging up, Nanita sat in silence, processing everything she'd learned. Ranger, no longer just the blind puppy, rested his head on her knee. She thought about Daniel training this brave little dog, believing in him despite his disability, preparing him for a crucial military role. It was exactly the kind of thing her principled younger brother would do. The pieces were falling into place. Daniel's suspicious behavior before his death, his investigation into equipment failures, the sophisticated hidden compartment in Ranger's collar, the encrypted coordinates, and now confirmation from his commanding officer that something was deeply wrong at Blackwater Industries. Daniel hadn't just died in an accident, he'd been silenced, but not before ensuring the evidence would survive through his loyal service dog. Nanita checked her watch. 15 hours until she met Warner. 15 hours to decide how much to reveal about what she'd found. Her brother's commanding officer seemed trustworthy, but Daniel's warning echoed in her mind. Trust no one at Blackwater Industries. The question was, how far did Blackwater's influence reach into the military itself? Nanita sat at her desk in the shelter's back office, the glow of her computer screen illuminating her tired face. Ranger dozed quietly beside her chair as her fingers flew across the keyboard, diving deeper into the mystery surrounding her brother's death. Blackwater Industries, she muttered, scrolling through search results. The company name led her to countless news articles and press releases, each painting a picture of corporate success and military innovation. But as she dug deeper, darker patterns emerged. At the helm of it all was Miguel Caldwell, the company's CEO. His silver-haired portrait stared back at her from the corporate website, his expensive suit and cold gray eyes projecting an image of ruthless success. Article after article detailed his rise to power through military contracts, each deal larger than the last. Multiple equipment failures reported in combat zones, Nanita read aloud from a buried news story. 3 soldiers killed when body armor failed to stop standard ammunition. Her heart clenched as she recognized the date, just 2 months before Daniel's death. She opened another tab, cross-referencing the casualties with Daniel's unit. The names matched. These were his fellow soldiers, men and women he'd served with. Nanita's hands trembled as she clicked through more reports. Defective helmets, faulty ammunition, compromised body armor. all traced back to Blackwater Industries. "You found it, didn't you, Daniel?" she whispered. "You discovered what Caldwell was doing?" Financial records revealed the truth behind the deaths. While soldiers died from equipment failures, Blackwater's profit margins soared. Government contracts worth millions flowed into the company's accounts, even as internal quality control reports, buried in dense regulatory filings, showed systematic problems with their products. Nanita pulled up a spreadsheet, tracking the pattern. Every time soldiers died from equipment failures, a new contract would follow, with Caldwell promising improved products at higher prices. But the deaths continued, and Blackwater's bank accounts grew. "He's selling them defective equipment on purpose," Nanita realized, her voice shaking with anger. "Cutting corners, pocketing the difference, then using the failures to secure bigger contracts." She turned to the encrypted coordinates from Ranger's collar, plugging them into a mapping system. The location pinpointed a remote facility 40 miles outside the city, officially listed as a Blackwater Industries storage complex. "What did you find there, Daniel?" she wondered, studying satellite images of the heavily secured building. "What evidence did you gather?" Ranger stirred suddenly, lifting his head with a low whine. Nanita reached down to scratch his ears, noticing how his training had given him an alertness that belied his blindness. "You were part of this too, weren't you? Daniel was training you to detect something specific at that facility." Her brother's final weeks now made terrible sense. He'd discovered Caldwell's scheme, gathered evidence of the defective equipment, and trained Ranger to detect whatever chemical agents might be involved. But before he could expose the truth, the training accident had silenced him forever. Or almost silenced him, because he'd made sure Ranger would carry the evidence to someone who could act on it. Nanita's computer suddenly froze. The screen flickered, then returned to normal. A chill ran down her spine as she remembered Warner's warning about being careful. She opened her browser's security settings, checking for any signs of intrusion. There it was, an unknown program running in the background, monitoring her searches. How long had they been watching? Her pulse quickened as she realized her investigation hadn't gone unnoticed. She quickly began closing tabs, erasing her browser history, but the damage was done. Somewhere in Blackwater's corporate offices, her digital footprint had already triggered alarms. Miguel Caldwell now knew someone was digging into his operation, following the same trail that had led to Daniel's death. Nanita looked down at Ranger, who sat alert beside her chair as if sensing her tension. "We need to be more careful, boy. The same people who killed Daniel know we're looking into them." She shut down her computer and gathered her notes, tucking them into her bag. The coordinates to the storage facility were burned into her memory. That's where the answers would be, where Daniel had found whatever evidence had cost him his life. But first, she had to meet Warner at the diner. Maybe the lieutenant colonel could help her understand exactly what Daniel had discovered at that facility, and why Caldwell had gone to such lengths to keep it hidden. One thing was certain, her brother hadn't died in any training accident. He'd been murdered to protect Miguel Caldwell's blood money, killed for daring to expose a conspiracy that had already claimed too many soldiers' lives. And now, through the loyal dog he'd trained and the evidence he'd hidden, Daniel had enlisted his estranged sister in his final mission, bringing Caldwell's deadly operation crashing down. Nanita pulled into the animal shelter's gravel parking lot just as the sun was rising, casting long shadows across the quiet building. Something felt wrong. The front door hung slightly ajar, its frame splintered around the lock. Her heart jumped into her throat as she noticed fresh tire tracks in the gravel, too wide for the shelter's old van. "No, no, no," she whispered, hands trembling as she dialed the police on her cell phone. While waiting for them to arrive, she cautiously approached the building. Glass crunched under her work boots. Someone had smashed the side window, too. Inside, the shelter was a mess. Filing cabinets hung open, their contents scattered across the floor. Computer monitors lay shattered on desks, but it was the empty kennels that made her blood run cold. They'd been looking for Ranger. Thank goodness she'd taken him home last night. The police arrived quickly, documenting the break-in while Nanita assessed the damage. None of the other animals had been hurt, just frightened. But the message was clear. Caldwell's people knew where to find her. As soon as the officers left, Nanita called Lieutenant Colonel Warner. They came for him, didn't they? Warner's voice was grim through the phone. Yes, but Ranger's safe. He's at my house. Nanita surveyed the ransacked office. What's really going on here, Colonel? Why are they so desperate to get him? Warner sighed heavily. We've been building a case against Blackwater for months. Defective equipment, falsified testing reports, kickbacks. But we can't prove any of it. Daniel, he found something concrete, something that would expose everything. The coordinates in Ranger's collar, Nanita said. They lead to some kind of storage facility. Sector 7, it's where Blackwater stores their rejected equipment instead of destroying it as required by contract. Daniel was gathering evidence there when... Warner's voice trailed off. When they killed him, Nanita finished quietly. Listen carefully, Warner continued. Federal agents are en route, but they won't arrive until morning. Caldwell's people are watching you. They'll try again tonight, and they won't be subtle this time. Nanita glanced at the security cameras she'd installed last year. What should I do? Get somewhere safe. Take Ranger and go. But Nanita looked around at the dozens of kennels filled with scared animals. I can't leave them unprotected. What if Caldwell's men come back and hurt them to send a message? Nanita, this isn't a game. These are trained mercenaries. These animals are my responsibility, Nanita cut in. And Ranger, he was Daniel's last mission. I won't run away. There was a long pause before Warner spoke again. All right, I'm 6 hours out. Lock down the facility. Don't let anyone in. I'll have local police increase patrols, but they're no match for Caldwell's team. After hanging up, Nanita sprang into action. She brought Ranger from her car and secured him in the medical room at the shelter's center. Then she began fortifying the building as best she could. She moved filing cabinets to block the broken front door and side windows. The shelter's heavy metal back door already had a good deadbolt, but she stacked extra kennels against it anyway. Security cameras covered every approach to the building. As darkness fell, Nanita sat in the medical room with Ranger, trying to decode more of Daniel's encrypted message on her laptop. The small German shepherd lay alert beside her chair, his cloudy eyes unseeing, but his ears constantly moving to track every sound. What else were you trying to tell us, Daniel? She whispered, studying the complex series of numbers and letters. The coordinates had been just the beginning. There was more hidden in the encryption, but she couldn't crack it. Ranger suddenly stiffened, a low growl rumbling in his chest. Nanita switched off her laptop, plunging the room into darkness. Through the security camera feed on her phone, she watched 3 dark figures approaching the shelter from different directions. They moved with military precision, armed with professional gear. Her hands shook as she texted Warner. They're here. The response came quickly. 2 hours out. Federal backup right behind me. Hold on. Nanita double-checked the doors and windows, then retreated to the medical room with Ranger. She'd chosen it carefully. Concrete walls, 1 heavy door, no windows. The safest place to make their stand. Outside, she heard the soft crunch of boots on gravel. Metal scraped against metal as the intruders tested the barricaded doors. They were testing the building's defenses, looking for a way in. Ranger pressed against her leg, his entire body tense. Despite his blindness, his military training was evident in every line of his body. He was ready to protect her, just as he had protected Daniel. Nanita pulled out her phone to check the security feeds again. The mercenaries had split up, systematically working their way around the building. They weren't being subtle anymore. They were coming in, one way or another. She held Ranger close, feeling the weight of Daniel's hidden evidence in his collar. Just a little longer, boy, she whispered. We just have to hold out until Warner gets here. A loud crash echoed from the front of the building. They had begun their assault. The crash of breaking glass echoed through the shelter as the mercenaries forced their way inside. Nanita's heart pounded as she heard heavy boots crunching over the scattered shards. In the darkness of the medical room, she clutched Ranger close, feeling his steady heartbeat against her hand. 3 men, she whispered, watching the security feed on her phone. Night vision goggles, military gear. Her hands trembled as she tried one last time to decode Daniel's encrypted message, knowing they were running out of time. Ranger's head suddenly snapped toward the door. His ears twitched, tracking sounds Nanita couldn't hear. When he tugged at her sleeve, she understood. They needed to move. Just in time. Heavy footsteps approached the medical room. Nanita quickly unplugged her laptop and slipped it into her backpack. Years of working in the shelter had taught her every corner, every hidden space. She knew paths the mercenaries wouldn't expect. "Come on, boy," she whispered, opening the small maintenance door behind the medical cabinets. It led to a narrow passage used for accessing plumbing and electrical systems. As they slipped through, Nanita heard the medical room door burst open. Ranger pressed against her legs, guiding her through the pitch-black passage. His military training showed in every movement, silent, purposeful, alert. They emerged into the kennel area where dozens of dogs lay quiet, sensing the danger. Nanita's knowledge of animal behavior had prepared them for this. She'd given mild sedatives to the more excitable dogs earlier, preventing them from alerting the intruders. "Where are they?" a gruff voice whispered from the corridor. "Check the kennels. The dog has to be here somewhere." Nanita and Ranger crouched behind the food storage bins. She pulled out her laptop again, fingers flying over the keys as she worked on Daniel's encryption. The message was complex, using a military-grade algorithm, but she was close to cracking it. Ranger suddenly stiffened. His head turned toward the right, tracking something Nanita couldn't detect. He nudged her toward the left just as a beam of light swept past their previous position. Despite his blindness, Ranger's other senses were incredibly sharp. He could hear the mercenaries' movements, smell their presence, sense their vibrations through the floor. Nanita realized he wasn't disabled. He was specially adapted for exactly this kind of situation. They moved silently through the darkness, Ranger guiding Nanita away from danger with gentle touches and subtle movements. When they needed to freeze, he would press against her legs. When they needed to move, he would tug her sleeve. The laptop beeped softly. The decryption program had finished running. Nanita's eyes widened as she read Daniel's complete message. Blackwater selling defective armor to all forward units. Caldwell doctoring test results. Full evidence cache hidden in abandoned bunker at coordinates. Chemical residue on rejected equipment proves tampering. Ranger trained to detect it. Trust no one except Warner. The message continued with detailed coordinates and access codes. Daniel had discovered everything and trained Ranger specifically to help prove it. A flashlight beam suddenly illuminated the wall near them. Nanita held her breath as heavy footsteps approached their position behind the industrial washing machines. Ranger's head tilted, tracking the sounds. He gently guided Nanita toward a small drainage grate in the floor, access to the shelter's basement storage area. She'd only used it for extra supplies, but now it offered escape. As quietly as possible, Nanita lifted the grate. The mercenary's footsteps grew closer. She could hear him speaking into a radio. "Nothing in the West Wing. Moving to laundry area now." Ranger went down first, his paws finding each rung of the access ladder surely despite his blindness. Nanita followed, pulling the grate closed above them just as the beam of light swept over it. The basement was pitch black, but Ranger moved confidently through the darkness. He led Nanita to the far corner, where she knew there was an old emergency exit that connected to the county's storm drain system. They waited in tense silence as boots thumped overhead. Nanita could hear the mercenaries growing frustrated, their searches becoming more aggressive. But they didn't know about the basement access. It wasn't on any building plans. The shelter had added it years after construction. Nanita checked her phone. 1 hour until Warner arrived with backup. They just had to stay hidden until then. Ranger suddenly pressed against her legs, his whole body alert. At the same moment, Nanita heard the scrape of metal. Someone was lifting the drainage grate. "Got fresh tracks here," a voice called from above. "They went down!" Nanita's heart raced as she heard boots on the ladder rungs. But Ranger was already guiding her toward the storm drain exit, his movements sure and swift in the darkness. Her hands found the old release lever, rusted but still functional. The heavy door creaked open just as flashlight beams cut through the basement darkness. Nanita and Ranger slipped through, pulling it shut behind them. She heard muffled curses as the mercenaries discovered the exit. But they were too late. Nanita and Ranger were already moving through the drainage tunnel, the blind dog leading with unwavering confidence while she clutched the laptop containing Daniel's vital evidence. In the dim light of the storm drain tunnel, Nanita's hands shook as she studied Daniel's decoded message on her laptop screen. The full scope of what her brother had uncovered left her breathless. Page after page of damning evidence filled the screen. Financial records showing millions in embezzled funds, internal emails discussing the deliberate substitution of substandard materials, and test results proving the body armor had failed quality controls. "Oh, Daniel," she whispered, her voice catching. Ranger pressed his head against her leg, offering silent comfort. "You knew exactly what you were doing, didn't you?" The evidence was meticulous, organized with military precision. Daniel had tracked every detail of Caldwell's operation, from the initial manufacturing changes that compromised the armor's integrity to the doctored test results that concealed the deadly flaws. Most devastating were the incident reports. Soldiers who had died when their supposedly bulletproof vests failed in combat. Nanita's eyes filled with tears as she read Daniel's personal notes. He had known he was in danger, documenting strange incidents and surveillance attempts in the weeks before his death. But instead of backing down, he had prepared for the worst. "That's why he trained you so carefully, wasn't it?" She scratched behind Ranger's ears, understanding dawning. "He knew you might need to complete his mission without him." The puppy's specialized training made perfect sense now. Daniel hadn't just taught Ranger to detect chemical weapons. He had prepared him as a backup plan, a way to ensure the evidence would reach someone who could act on it even if Daniel couldn't protect it himself. Her phone buzzed with an incoming message from Warner. "Are you safe? Federal team en route. 20 minutes out." Nanita quickly typed back their location in the drainage system, then returned to studying the coordinates Daniel had encrypted. They led to an abandoned military bunker just outside the city limits, a Cold War relic that had been decommissioned decades ago. Using her phone's mapping system, she located the bunker's entrance. It was carefully hidden, masked by years of overgrowth, but Daniel's notes included detailed access instructions. More importantly, he had installed modern security measures to protect his evidence cache. She opened a secure connection to the bunker's surveillance system using the passwords from Daniel's files. The camera feeds showed the facility was untouched. Caldwell's people hadn't found it. The evidence was still there, waiting. "Smart, Daniel," she murmured. "Hide it somewhere they'd never think to look." But getting to the bunker would be dangerous. Caldwell's mercenaries were still searching the shelter above, and undoubtedly had teams watching the surrounding area. The coordinates placed the bunker 3 miles away, through exposed terrain that would leave them vulnerable. Nanita studied Daniel's final message again, dated just days before his death. "If you're reading this, I didn't make it. But the truth has to come out. Caldwell's greed has killed too many good soldiers. The evidence in this bunker will expose everything. The defective armor, the covered-up deaths, the millions he's stolen. I've gathered communication intercepts, financial records, material tests, everything needed for a federal prosecution. Ranger knows how to find it. Trust him. He's been trained for this." Tears spilled down Nanita's cheeks as she finally understood the full weight of her brother's sacrifice. He had died trying to protect his fellow soldiers, to expose a conspiracy that was killing them for profit. And in his final days, He had ensured the evidence would survive him. "He was a hero," she whispered to Ranger. "A real hero. And I never got to tell him I was sorry for doubting him." The puppy whined softly, nuzzling her hand. Despite his blindness, his bearing was proud and determined, just like Daniel's had been. He had inherited his handler's sense of duty, his unwavering courage in the face of danger. Nanita wiped her eyes, new determination filling her. Daniel had trusted her to complete his mission. He had sent Ranger to her specifically, knowing she would understand the evidence and have the courage to act on it. The sound of boots echoing through the drainage tunnel snapped her back to their immediate danger. Caldwell's men were getting closer. They knew what was at stake. Millions in contracts, prison sentences for fraud and negligent homicide, the destruction of their entire operation. They would kill to prevent this evidence from reaching federal investigators. Nanita quickly saved the decoded files to an encrypted drive and closed her laptop. They needed to move, to get to the bunker before Caldwell's people figured out its location. Daniel had died to expose this conspiracy. She wouldn't let his sacrifice be in vain. She touched Ranger's head gently. "Ready to finish your mission, boy?" "For Daniel?" The blind puppy stood tall, every muscle alert and ready. He might have lost his handler, but he hadn't forgotten his training or his purpose. Together, they would complete Daniel's final mission and bring justice to those responsible for his death. The harsh fluorescent lights of the shelter's medical facility cast stark shadows as Nanita pressed herself against the cold metal cabinets. Her heart pounded as heavy footsteps approached from the hallway. Ranger crouched beside her, his ears pricked forward, sensing the danger. 3 armed men in tactical gear burst through the door, weapons raised. Miguel Caldwell followed them, his expensive suit out of place among the medical equipment and steel tables. "Dr. Thornton," Caldwell's voice was smooth but cold. "This could have been much simpler. Hand over the dog and any evidence you've found, and we can avoid unnecessary unpleasantness." Nanita's hand tightened on Ranger's collar. "You killed my brother." Sergeant Hayes made unfortunate choices. Caldwell stepped closer, his gray eyes hard. "Don't make the same mistake." Suddenly, Ranger's behavior changed. The blind puppy's nose twitched, and a low growl rumbled in his throat. Nanita recognized the alert posture from Daniel's training notes. Ranger had detected something dangerous. The sound of breaking glass and shouting erupted from the shelter's main entrance. Caldwell spun toward the noise, his composure cracking. "What's happening?" "Federal agents, drop your weapons!" Lieutenant Colonel Warner's voice boomed through the building. The thunder of boots and tactical commands filled the corridors. Caldwell's face twisted with rage. He grabbed a container of medical waste and hurled it toward the shelves of patient records. "Burn it all! Leave no evidence!" But before his men could act, Ranger launched himself at Caldwell with unexpected precision. The blind puppy's specialized training kicked in as he detected chemical traces on Caldwell's clothing, residue from the illegal weapons testing that had killed so many soldiers. His teeth locked onto Caldwell's arm, dropping the defense contractor to his knees. Warner burst through the door with her tactical team, weapons trained on Caldwell's men. "Federal agents, on the ground now!" The mercenaries hesitated, looking to their boss for direction. Caldwell, still struggling with Ranger, reached for something in his jacket. "He's got a weapon!" Nanita shouted. Warner's team reacted instantly. 2 agents tackled Caldwell while others subdued his men. The hidden pistol clattered across the floor as Ranger maintained his grip, refusing to let the man escape. "Nanita, are you all right?" Warner rushed to her side while her team secured the scene. "I'm fine." Nanita's voice shook with relief. "But we need to move fast. Daniel's evidence cache is in an old military bunker outside the city. Caldwell probably has more men watching it." Warner nodded sharply. "Already handled. Second team is securing the location now. Daniel's documentation is safe." Caldwell struggled against the agents cuffing him. "You have nothing. No proof." We have everything." Warner's voice was steel. "Financial records, communication intercepts, material tests. Daniel documented it all. Every defective vest, every soldier's death, every dollar you stole." Nanita watched as federal agents led Caldwell and his men away. Ranger finally released his hold on the defense contractor, returning to press against her leg. She knelt and hugged the brave puppy, tears flowing freely. "Good boy," she whispered. "You finished Daniel's mission. You protected his evidence." Warner placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Your brother was a hero, Nanita. He died trying to expose this conspiracy and save his fellow soldiers. And thanks to you and Ranger, he succeeded." Nanita looked up at the lieutenant colonel, seeing the same grief and determination in her eyes. Daniel knew the risks. He made sure the truth would come out, even if he couldn't protect it himself. "The evidence he gathered is devastating." Warner helped Nanita to her feet. "Caldwell's entire operation is exposed. The defective armor, the embezzled millions, the covered-up deaths, it's all documented. Federal prosecutors are already preparing the case. Outside, dawn was breaking over the animal shelter. Emergency vehicles and federal agents filled the parking lot. Nanita watched as Caldwell was placed in an armored transport, his empire crumbling around him. Justice would finally come for Daniel and all the other soldiers who had died because of one man's greed. Ranger sat proudly at her side, his unseeing eyes fixed forward, his posture alert and ready. He had completed the mission Daniel trained him for, using his specialized skills to help capture the man responsible for his handler's death. "What happens now?" Nanita asked, scratching behind Ranger's ears. "Now," Warner smiled, "we make sure Daniel's sacrifice wasn't in vain. The truth he died protecting will save countless other soldiers' lives. And as for this brave boy," she knelt to pet Ranger, "I think he's found his new home." Nanita hugged the puppy close, feeling the weight of the past few days finally lifting. Daniel's final message had reached exactly who it needed to. A sister who would fight for justice, a commander who would pursue the truth, and a loyal dog who would help them see it through. The morning sun caught Ranger's collar, making the military tags shine. Nanita touched them gently, remembering the brother she had lost and the hero she had finally come to understand. Thanks to his courage and foresight, a deadly conspiracy had been exposed. Thanks to a blind puppy's unwavering loyalty, justice would finally be served. The federal courthouse buzzed with activity as Miguel Caldwell's sentencing concluded. Nanita sat in the gallery, Ranger at her feet, as the judge delivered the verdict. Life imprisonment without parole for treason, weapons fraud, and the deaths of 23 soldiers who had worn his company's defective armor. The court orders all recovered assets from Blackwater Industries, totaling $63 million, to be seized and redistributed, the judge announced, her voice firm. As requested by the prosecution, these funds will establish the Hayes Foundation for Military Service Animals, honoring the late Sergeant First Class Daniel Hayes. Nanita's hand found Ranger's head, drawing strength from his steady presence. Lieutenant Colonel Warner, seated beside her, squeezed her shoulder gently. "Your brother would be proud," Warner whispered. "This foundation will save countless lives, both human and animal." As they left the courthouse, reporters crowded around them. Nanita had grown more comfortable with public speaking over the past months, knowing each interview helped spread Daniel's story and expose the corruption he died fighting. "Dr. Thornton, what does this verdict mean for military oversight?" a reporter called out. Nanita paused, Ranger sitting alertly beside her. "It means the system my brother died protecting can work. It means one person's courage to stand up against corruption can make a difference. Daniel believed in serving others, both his fellow soldiers and the animals he trained. This foundation will honor that dedication." Back at the newly renovated training facility, formerly the underfunded county shelter where she'd first found Ranger, Nanita watched as construction crews installed the final touches on the Hayes Center for Service Animal Training. The building's transformation mirrored her own journey from isolated shelter veterinarian to director of a groundbreaking program. Warner joined her, both women observing as veterans worked with rescue animals in the outdoor training area. "The first class graduates next month," the lieutenant colonel said. "6 disabled service animals paired with wounded warriors. Daniel's legacy in action." Nanita nodded, emotion tightening her throat. He always saw potential where others saw broken things. She watched as a veteran with a prosthetic leg worked patiently with a 3-legged German shepherd. Just like these veterans see past our animals' disabilities to their hearts. Ranger had thrived in his new role. Despite his blindness, he'd become the program's star trainer, helping teach other rescue animals the skills he'd learned from Daniel. His gentle nature and unwavering focus showed new handlers that limitations didn't define ability. In her office, Nanita kept a photo of Daniel in his dress uniform, his young face serious but kind. She'd finally made peace with their estrangement, understanding that while they'd chosen different paths, they'd shared the same core values of service and protection. "I get it now, little brother," she whispered to the photo. "Why you followed Dad into service. Why you risked everything to expose Caldwell. You saw something wrong and couldn't walk away, just like I couldn't walk away from Ranger that first day." The Hayes Foundation had already saved dozens of shelter animals, training them for specialized service roles. Many worked with veterans struggling with PTSD or physical injuries, while others, like Ranger, used their enhanced senses for detection work. Nanita watched through her office window as Ranger demonstrated scent detection techniques to a new group of handlers. The blind puppy, who had once clung desperately to her boots, now moved with confidence, his disability forgotten in the focus of his work. "Some souls shine brightest after being broken," Warner had said during the Foundation's opening ceremony. Sergeant Hayes understood that. He saw it in the animals he trained, in the soldiers he served with, and in the sister he never stopped believing in. The afternoon sun streamed through the windows as Nanita conducted final evaluations for the graduating class. A Marine veteran with burn scars worked smoothly with a partially deaf Australian shepherd, their movements synchronized through months of training. A former Army medic who'd lost both legs guided a retriever born with a spinal defect through complex mobility exercises. "Remember," Nanita told the class, Ranger demonstrating each command perfectly despite his blindness, "it's not about overcoming disabilities. It's about discovering new ways to serve, to connect, to heal. Every animal here was once considered unadoptable. Every veteran here was told their service days were over. Together, you prove those limitations wrong every day." The Hayes Foundation had become more than a tribute to Daniel's sacrifice. It was a living testament to the power of second chances, of finding strength in vulnerability, of healing through service to others. As the day wound down, Nanita sat on a bench in the training yard, Ranger's head in her lap. The facility hummed with purpose, veterans finding new missions, animals discovering their potential, wounds transforming into wisdom. "We did it, boy," she murmured to Ranger. "We honored Daniel's courage. We turned loss into legacy." She fingered his service tags, now marked with both Daniel's name and her own. "Sometimes the most broken souls have the most to give. Daniel knew that. He trusted us to understand it too." Ranger lifted his head, ears pricking toward approaching footsteps. Warner joined them, carrying graduation certificates for the next day's ceremony. "6 more teams ready to serve," Warner said proudly. "The Pentagon's requesting 3 more training centers based on our model. Daniel's ripples keep spreading." Nanita smiled, watching the sunset paint the training yard in gold. Where she had once seen only endings, a career spent euthanizing unwanted animals, a family relationship broken beyond repair, she now saw endless beginnings. Every rescued animal, every healing veteran, every act of service honored the brother who had trusted his final mission to a blind puppy, and a sister who had lost her way. In the growing dusk, Ranger stood alertly beside her, ready as always to serve. Together they had transformed grief into purpose, brokenness into strength, and one soldier's sacrifice into a legacy of healing that would touch countless lives. Thank you for watching. Stories like this remind us who we are If something touched your heart, go ahead and subscribe. I'll be back tomorrow with another story that just might stay with you.